Claire Harrison. That was the exact name my husband screamed into the phone 18 minutes after he told me to get out of our home. By then, every single joint account we shared had already been frozen. By then, my signature had already triggered the immediate withdrawal of my $885 million ownership stake from the company everyone believed belonged to him. And by then, the empire he thought he controlled had already started collapsing, one legal document at a time. My phone kept vibrating uncontrollably on the passenger seat. One missed call, then 12, then 34, then 67. I didn't answer a single one. Less than half an hour earlier, while everyone around us sang happy birthday to our little boy, I had watched my husband kiss my best friend in my late father's study. And when I confronted him, he looked me straight in the eyes and said 5 cold words I will never forget: accept it or get out. So, I did. I got out. But I didn't leave empty-handed. I carried the only thing that truly mattered, my son. People often assume that betrayal arrives with warning signs loud enough for anyone to hear, but looking back now, I know that's rarely true. It comes quietly, wrapped inside daily routines, excuses, and little changes you explain away because love makes you overly generous with second chances. My name is Claire Harrison. I am 38 years old, a widow's daughter, and the mother of one beautiful little boy named Ethan. For most of my adult life, I was the woman standing just outside the spotlight while everyone applauded someone else. Our home sat on nearly 4 acres in Fairfield County, Connecticut. It wasn't flashy by Billionaire standards, though magazines occasionally featured it because the lush gardens overlooked a small private lake. My father had bought the property decades earlier when Harrison Capital was still a modest investment firm with fewer than 20 employees. Dad believed success should be lived quietly. He drove his own car, knew every employee's spouse by name, and every Christmas, he personally handed bonuses to the custodial staff before anyone else. When he passed away 6 years ago, after a brief illness, I inherited his shares according to a trust that had been carefully planned long before anyone imagined he would be gone so soon. Those shares represented 62% of Harrison Capital. Most people never knew that, which was exactly how Dad wanted it. Daniel and I met 15 years ago, at a charity fundraiser in New York. He was handsome without trying too hard, confident without seeming arrogant, at least, that's how he appeared back then. He made me laugh and remembered the smallest details. When we married, people called us the perfect couple, and for a long time, they were probably right. Then success grew faster than his character. Harrison Capital expanded aggressively into private equity, commercial real estate, and technology investments. Newspapers loved interviewing Daniel because he spoke remarkably well on camera. I, however, preferred conference rooms over television studios, and spreadsheets over microphones. Eventually, the public began referring to Harrison Capital as Daniel Harrison's company. Neither of us corrected them. It didn't seem important until it became everything. Our son Ethan arrived after years of believing we might never have children. Holding him for the first time felt like every disappointment I had ever carried suddenly made sense. He was the greatest gift of my life, and his very first birthday deserved to be extraordinary. Melissa insisted on helping organize everything. Melissa Carter had been my best friend since college. We had survived finals together, stood beside each other at our weddings, and visited each other through illnesses, promotions, heartbreaks, and celebrations. She knew every single chapter of my life, or so I believed. The party filled our backyard with nearly 80 guests, neighbors, family, business associates, children chasing colorful balloons, and grandparents sitting comfortably beneath white tents. The delicious smell of barbecue drifted through the summer air, while a local jazz trio played soft standards. My mother-in-law spent nearly an hour showing Ethan to anyone willing to admire him. He has Daniel's smile, she proudly announced. I smiled politely. Actually, He had my father's eyes, the same gentle grey, the same thoughtful expression. Small details matter deeply to mothers. Daniel floated naturally from group to group, shaking hands, laughing loudly, and accepting compliments, as though he were hosting a grand corporate reception instead of his son's birthday party. I watched him from across the yard. He barely looked at me. Months earlier, that might have hurt; now, it simply felt familiar. Marriages change, people become busy, and children demand attention. Those were the convenient explanations I kept repeating to myself whenever something felt slightly off. Melissa appeared beside me carrying another tray of lemonade. "You've hardly eaten a thing," she said warmly. "I've been chasing a 1-year-old, I replied with a weary laugh. "You always wanted this, Claire," she squeezed my shoulder. "I'm so happy for you." It's funny how some devastating lies sound exactly like genuine kindness. As afternoon turned toward evening, the guests gathered around the birthday cake, decorated with blue frosting, tiny edible stars, and one oversized candle shaped like the number 1. Someone dimmed the patio lights, and everyone crowded close as phones came out. The familiar chorus began, "Happy birthday to you." Ethan clapped enthusiastically because everyone else was clapping. He had no idea the song was for him, he simply laughed, and I knew I would remember that innocent laugh until the day I die. Halfway through the song, I noticed Daniel wasn't beside us anymore. At first, I assumed he had stepped inside to answer an urgent business call. That happened often. But then I realized Melissa had disappeared, too. Something inside me tightened. Not panic, not suspicion, just a sudden, sharp awareness, a tiny thread pulling at the edge of my thoughts. I quietly slipped away before anyone noticed. The hallway inside the house was cool and silent after the cheerful noise outside. The kitchen was empty, and so was the living room. I walked past the main staircase toward my father's old study. The heavy door wasn't completely closed, just slightly open, enough to hear a whisper, and then a laugh. Melissa's laugh. I stopped dead in my tracks. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, but instead, I looked through the narrow opening. Daniel had both hands placed around her waist. She was touching his face like she had done it hundreds of times before. Then they kissed, not briefly, not awkwardly, but comfortably. Like two people who had completely stopped worrying about getting caught. Time slowed down in the strangest way. I noticed ridiculous, mundane things: the antique clock Dad had restored himself, the framed fishing photo on the bookshelf, and Melissa's red lipstick smeared on Daniel's collar. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply closed the door as quietly as I had opened it. Outside, loud applause erupted as Ethan blew out his candle with everyone's help. I walked back into the backyard, wearing the exact same smile I had worn all afternoon. Nobody noticed a thing. I held my son, posed for photographs, opened presents, and thanked guests for coming. An elderly neighbor hugged me tightly. "You've built such a beautiful family, Claire." I hugged her back, whispering, "Thank you." Sometimes grace simply means surviving the next 5 minutes. The last guests finally left shortly after 9 p.m. Paper plates littered the tables, half-deflated balloons drifted across the lawn, and the catering staff packed away their equipment. Melissa had already gone home, or so Daniel claimed. He poured himself a glass of scotch, as if nothing unusual had happened. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen watching him. "We need to talk," I said. He sighed heavily before I could even finish speaking. "Can this wait, Claire?" "No." He looked annoyed rather than concerned. "What now?" "I saw you," I said plainly. His expression didn't change, not even a flicker of surprise. "In Dad's study. You and Melissa." He set his glass down on the counter. Without saying a single word, he reached out and grabbed my wrist, not hard enough to leave physical bruises, but firmly enough that I had no choice except to follow him upstairs. He pulled me into our primary bedroom, closed the door, locked it, and turned toward me with a face so cold I barely recognized the man I had married. "Claire," he said evenly. "Accept it or get out." I stared at him, waiting for the apology that never came. Instead, he continued coldly, "Melissa understands me. She doesn't question every business decision I make. This has been going on for a while, and honestly, I'm tired of pretending. You brought her into our son's birthday." He shrugged carelessly. "It wasn't planned. You kissed her in my father's study." Another shrug. "I deserve to be happy." I searched his face for a shred of guilt. There wasn't any, only supreme certainty. Then he delivered the sentence that convinced me my marriage had ended long before tonight: "You won't leave anyway. You need this life too much." He genuinely believed the house was his, the company was his, the money was his, and that I was simply the fortunate woman who benefited from his success. I looked at him for another long moment, turned around, and walked past him without saying another word. He didn't even try to stop me. Upstairs, Ethan was fast asleep in his crib, still wearing the little blue sweater my mother had knitted for him. I lifted him carefully into my arms. He stirred, rested his tiny head against my shoulder, and drifted right back to sleep. I packed one small overnight bag and nothing else. No jewelry, no photographs, no pointless arguments. As I backed my car out of the driveway, I caught one last glimpse of the house where I had believed my family would grow old together. In less than 30 minutes, Daniel Harrison was going to discover just how little he understood about the woman he had ordered to leave. I didn't look back as the heavy gates closed behind me. The quiet road leading away from our estate wound through residential neighborhoods where porch lights glowed softly against the warm Connecticut night. Ethan slept peacefully in his car seat, completely unaware that his entire world had been upended before he had even finished celebrating his first birthday. I envied him. Children don't measure life by betrayal, they measure it by whether someone is there when they wake up. "I'm here, sweetheart," I whispered into the rearview mirror. He never opened his eyes. I drove without a clear destination for nearly 20 minutes before pulling into the parking lot of a small waterfront hotel in Stamford. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, discreet, and close enough to Manhattan for the emergency business calls I already knew I needed to make. The young woman at the front desk smiled kindly as I checked in. "Just for a few nights?" she asked, noticing Ethan sleeping in my arms. "He looks exhausted." "It was a big birthday," I replied softly. She handed me a room key. "I hope tomorrow is easier for you." "So do I." Neither of us knew just how impossible that wish was. Once inside the room, I laid Ethan carefully in the portable crib the hotel staff brought upstairs. I watched him breathe for several long minutes, then walked out onto the small balcony overlooking the harbor. The cool night air steadied my nerves, and I finally allowed myself one deep, cleansing breath, not a sob, not a cry of anger, just pure acceptance. My father used to tell me something whenever difficult corporate decisions landed on his desk: "Claire, emotions belong in your heart. Decisions belong in your head." I had spent years believing those words were strictly about business. That night, I realized they were about survival. I reached into my handbag and removed the sleek leather folder I almost always carried. Most women carried cosmetics. I carried legal documents. Years earlier, after my father died, our family attorneys had insisted I never travel without copies of our trust agreements and emergency corporate authorizations. They hoped I'd never need them, and so did I. I dialed the first number. Richard, my family attorney, answered on the second ring. "Claire," his voice immediately shifted tone. "What's happened?" "I've left Daniel." Silence followed, then a slow exhale over the line. I was afraid this day might come. You knew. I knew something wasn't right, Claire. I just didn't know what. What do you need? I need the emergency provisions activated, I said firmly. When? Now? I'll notify the legal team immediately. Everything. Understood, he paused. Are you and Ethan safe? Yes. He's sleeping soundly. I'll handle the rest. Next came Margaret Ellis, my private banker in New York, who had worked alongside my father for almost 30 years. Claire, she said, instantly sensing the urgency. You never call this late. I need immediate action, Margaret. I'm listening. I want every joint personal account frozen tonight. No exceptions. She hesitated for only a heartbeat. This will create quite a severe reaction from Daniel. I know. Do you have legal authority? I signed the authorization 6 years ago. I remember, Margaret said cleanly. Consider it done within minutes. The third call mattered most of all. It wasn't to the CEO or the board, it was to Harrison Capital's corporate secretary, Linda. Few people outside executive leadership understood her crucial role. She maintained every official corporate record, every shareholder authorization, and every emergency governance document. Claire. Linda answered sleepily. I'm sorry to wake you, Linda. I need Resolution 12 activated. Complete silence filled the phone line. When she finally spoke, her voice had transformed into a formal corporate tone. Are you certain? Yes. That provision has never been used before, Claire. I know. It will immediately trigger board notification, affect market perception, and remove nearly $900 million in equity. I understand, Linda. Begin immediately. The call ended, and I leaned heavily against the balcony railing. There it was, the point of no return. People often imagine enormous financial decisions happen with dramatic speeches in crowded conference rooms, but they don't. Sometimes they happen because one exhausted woman says one quiet word, yes. My father had insisted on these unusual protections after watching close friends lose family businesses through bitter divorces and hostile takeovers. He had structured Harrison Capital so that inherited controlling shares could never be manipulated or seized through marriage alone. Ownership remained mine, always. Even Daniel had signed formal legal acknowledgements years earlier. I often wondered whether he had actually read them. Apparently not. My fourth call was to our Chief Financial Officer, David Moreno. Claire, he answered cautiously. I've already received 2 automated corporate alerts. Is this real? It's real, David. Daniel and I have separated. He didn't pry for gossip. Instead, he simply asked, what do you need from me? I need employee payroll protected. He sounded confused. Payroll. Whatever happens over the next few weeks, our employees don't deserve financial uncertainty. Over 1,200 people depend on those paychecks. David grew quiet for a moment before saying, your father would be immensely proud of that answer. Claire. At 10:42 p.m., my phone vibrated. A text from Margaret, joint personal accounts are fully frozen. Daniel attempted 3 separate major transactions while we were processing. At 10:45 p.m., a text from Richard, emergency filings are complete. At 10:47 p.m., a text from Linda, Resolution 12 has been officially entered into the corporate record. Everything had executed exactly as my father designed it, legal, transparent, and completely irreversible. At 10:49 p.m., I opened the secure shareholder portal on my phone. One final digital authorization remained, the formal withdrawal of my entire $885 million ownership stake. My thumb hovered above the confirmation button. I didn't think about Daniel's betrayal, I thought about my father, about Ethan, and about every lesson I had ignored because I believed love could fix arrogance. I pressed confirm. The screen flashed a single word, completed. For several seconds, total quiet filled the hotel room. Then the storm hit. Was? Daniel. Ignored. Melissa. Ignored. The chief operating officer. Ignored. The board chairman. Ignored. The vibrations came so rapidly the phone almost crawled across the glass tabletop. I picked it up once, not to answer, but to look. 67 missed calls. Voicemails poured in back-to-back. First message: Daniel, Claire, answer the phone. This isn't funny. Second message: what the hell did you just do? Third message: the bank says our accounts are frozen. 10th message: the anger had completely vanished, replaced by sheer panic. Claire, please call me back. 20th message: he was screaming at his advisors in the background, sounding terrified. I switched the phone to silent. 4 years, the world believed Daniel Harrison held the reins of Harrison Capital. Television interviews had reinforced that image, magazine covers had celebrated his leadership, and industry conferences invited him to deliver keynotes. Meanwhile, I had quietly chaired governance meetings, approved long-term strategy, reviewed risk assessments, and signed the foundational documents. Recognition had never interested me, peace had. But peace requires mutual respect. Without it, silence is just surrender. Around midnight, a call came from an unknown number. I answered. Claire. It was Daniel, calling from a borrowed phone. You've made your point. My point. You froze everything. Yes. You've got to reverse this right now. No, Daniel, I said calmly. The board is calling an emergency meeting. I expected that. The lending banks are asking questions. I expected that, too. His breathing was frantic. You can't do this. You'll destroy everything we built. I finally spoke the words that had been waiting inside me all evening. No, Daniel. I am protecting what my father built. He went completely silent. Neither of us spoke for several seconds, and then I ended the call. I walked back into the room where Ethan stirred softly in his sleep. I rested my hand gently on his back, and his tiny fingers wrapped around mine without him waking up. In that simple moment, every lingering doubt vanished. I hadn't left because I wanted revenge. I left because my son deserved to grow up watching a mother who knew the difference between forgiveness and permission. Outside, the harbor lights shimmered across the dark water. Inside, my phone finally went still. For the first time since walking out of that house, the silence no longer felt empty, it felt like the beginning of a brand new life. They reminded me that the world hadn't ended, only one dark chapter had. When Ethan and I returned to the hotel room, I finally turned my phone back on. The screen lit up so quickly with a relentless barrage of sound that it almost startled me. More than 200 notifications, voicemails, emails, texts, urgent board alerts, financial updates, and media inquiries. I ignored almost all of them until one specific message caught my eye. It was from David Moreno. Call me when you can, Claire. It's serious. I dialed his number immediately. You've probably seen the market alerts, David said without preamble. I haven't looked. Our lenders just suspended negotiations on the Chicago acquisition. I expected something like that, I admitted. Not this quickly, though. He sighed heavily. 3 institutional investors are demanding an emergency briefing today. Claire, how are the employees? They are scared. That single word settled heavily in my chest. Scared. Not angry, not disloyal, just frightened. The rumor mill is moving faster than the facts, David continued. What are people saying? I asked. Everything. That the company is bankrupt. It isn't. That you're divorcing Daniel. That's true. That federal investigators are involved. They aren't. That the company will shut down by Friday. It won't, I said firmly. David paused. What do you want me to tell people, Claire? I looked out the window toward the harbor. The truth, which is that payroll is completely protected. I've already secured that. No layoffs. I can promise you that no one will lose their job simply because two corporate executives failed their marriage. David became quiet on the line. Finally, he said, I'll make sure everyone hears exactly that. After hanging up, I packed our bags. The hotel had served its purpose, but I needed somewhere quieter, somewhere that still felt like a true home. 3 hours later, Ethan and I pulled into the gravel driveway of my parents' old lake house in Western Connecticut. The house wasn't large or glamorous. It had creaky wooden floors, faded blue shutters, and a porch swing my father had built himself when I was 12. Every happy summer of my childhood lived inside those walls. Dad had taught me to fish from the small wooden dock, and Mom had planted roses that somehow continued blooming years after she was gone. The entire place smelled like cedar, old books, and quiet memories. I unlocked the front door, carried Ethan inside, and whispered for the first time in years, "Welcome home." The words felt completely honest. Life slowed down almost immediately. Instead of rushing into corporate conference calls before breakfast, I made oatmeal while Ethan watched colorful birds through the kitchen window. Instead of reviewing quarterly earnings, I pushed a stroller along the serene lake shore. Instead of attending formal executive dinners, I sat on the porch listening to frogs sing as the sun disappeared behind the trees. The silence wasn't lonely, it was deeply healing. By the third day, the media had discovered I was gone. Television news trucks appeared outside our former estate, and financial commentators endlessly debated whether Harrison Capital would survive. Some called my swift actions ruthless, others called them brilliant. Neither description felt accurate. I wasn't trying to win a game, I was simply trying to stop pretending. Late that afternoon, someone knocked on the front door. I already knew who it was before looking through the glass, Melissa. She stood on the porch wearing oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. For a long moment, I considered not answering, but then I opened the door halfway. "What are you doing here, Melissa?" "I just want to talk, Claire. Please." I stepped outside, closing the heavy wooden door behind me so Ethan couldn't hear. Melissa removed her sunglasses, looking utterly exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes, and her usual high society confidence had completely vanished. "I never wanted this to happen," she stammered. I almost laughed out loud. "You never wanted what to happen?" "To get caught. I never wanted to hurt you. You managed to do it anyway." Tears formed instantly in her eyes. "It just happened, Claire." I looked at her quietly. "No, it didn't, Melissa." She shook her head desperately. "We didn't plan it." "I know," I said calmly. Her expression shifted in confusion. "You do?" "Affairs aren't usually planned." I met her eyes directly. "They are chosen." She looked down, her shoulders slumping. "It was a mistake." I reached into my handbag and removed a thin paper folder. "I thought you might say that." She frowned. "What is that?" I handed her several printed pages, hotel receipts, private flight manifests, fine dining reservations, corporate credit card statements, and phone records. Each page meticulously documented secret rendezvous stretching back nearly 2 full years. As she turned the pages slowly, all the color drained from her face. How did you get these?" "I oversee corporate compliance, Melissa," I said quietly. "I didn't investigate because I was suspicious of a betrayal. I investigated because company expenses suddenly stopped making sense." Neither of us spoke. A cool breeze rustled the maple trees above us. Finally, she whispered, "Daniel told me you never paid attention to the business." "I paid attention to everything," I replied softly. "Then why didn't you say anything sooner?" "Because I kept hoping there was another logical explanation." Melissa covered her mouth with trembling hands. "I am so sorry, Claire." I believed she felt ashamed, but I didn't believe she was sorry until she had been caught. Those are two very different things. "What happens now?" she asked through her tears. "You go home." "And what about us?" "There hasn't been an us since you walked into my father's study." She began crying openly. I felt a sense of quiet sadness for her, but no pity. She turned, walked to her car, and drove away without looking back. I never saw her again. That evening, David called once more to report on the board's emergency meeting. It went poorly for Daniel, David admitted. He spent most of the meeting insisting this financial freeze was temporary, but they know better now. And there was another issue: the banks requested updated corporate governance documents, and they've finally realized who the actual controlling shareholder was. I couldn't help a faint smile. 4 years, they congratulated the wrong person. "You never seemed to mind," David noted. "I honestly didn't. Recognition never mattered to me." "So, what changed, Claire?" I looked through the screen door. Ethan was sitting on the living room rug, carefully stacking wooden blocks my father had carved decades earlier. One block fell over, and he laughed, immediately starting again. "I stopped confusing humility with invisibility," I said softly. Night fell, and after Ethan fell asleep, I sat alone on the wooden dock. The clear lake reflected thousands of twinkling stars. My father had loved this exact view. Whenever business became overwhelming, he would bring me here. He once told me, "Companies recover from bad quarters, Claire. Families don't always recover from broken trust." At the time, I thought he was talking about corporate balance sheets, but now I understood he was talking about human lives. My phone rang again. "Daniel." I answered, and his voice sounded entirely different, no longer confident or commanding, just utterly broken. "Claire. I've been looking everywhere for you." "I know." "I wasn't calling about the money," he stammered, his voice cracking. "The board doesn't trust me anymore. They keep asking questions." "They should, Daniel. I never imagined that everything could unravel this fast." "Neither did I said quietly. "Not because of the company, Daniel, but because of us. The company isn't falling apart because I left, it's falling apart because trust did." The line remained completely silent for several seconds. Then he whispered softly, I think I'm finally beginning to understand." For the first time, he had stopped blaming everyone else for his demise. Sometimes, that is where real change begins. The next morning, I decided to tackle a project I had postponed for years: the attic. Dust covered nearly every surface, old fishing poles leaned against the wooden walls, and Christmas decorations filled faded cartons. In the corner, tucked behind an old bookcase, I discovered a small cedar chest with my name written across the lid, Claire. Inside were several neatly arranged envelopes carrying handwritten labels from my late father: "For your wedding, for the day you become a mother, and for the day you doubt yourself." At the bottom rested one final envelope in my father's familiar blue fountain pen ink: "For the day someone betrays your trust." I sat on the dusty attic floor, my heart pounding, and opened it. "My dear Claire, if you are reading this, life has probably disappointed you in a way I deeply hoped it never would. Money has a peculiar way of revealing character. It doesn't create selfishness, it merely exposes it. Success doesn't change people nearly as much as it removes the reasons they once hid who they truly were. Never confuse revenge with justice. Justice protects innocent people while holding the guilty accountable. Revenge often forgets the difference. If betrayal ever places great power in your hands, remember this: the receptionist didn't betray you. The accountant didn't betray you. The maintenance worker didn't betray you. The families who depend upon honest work deserve better than becoming casualties of someone else's foolish pride. Those words landed heavily in my soul. I had protected payroll, but was that enough? I folded the letter, carried the cedar chest downstairs, and called David Moreno. "Can you come to the lake house?" David arrived after lunch carrying 2 thick corporate binders. We sat on the sunny porch while Ethan napped inside. "I've never seen the board this divided," David admitted. "They are frightened, but they are also embarrassed because they blindly backed Daniel without understanding the company's true ownership structure." "What do you recommend, David?" I asked. He leaned forward. "Separate Daniel from executive authority immediately. Stabilize governance. Keep the company operating normally, and do not become CEO yourself." That answer caught me by surprise. "Why not?" "Because right now, the corporate world expects this to become a bitter, personal war. Show them it isn't. Prove it, not through angry speeches, but through wise decisions." That afternoon, we drafted a formal proposal for the board. An interim executive committee would oversee operations. An experienced outside CEO would eventually be hired. I would remain majority owner and chair of long-term governance. And Daniel would be removed from executive authority. No public humiliation, no dramatic press conferences, no revenge, just clean, solid governance. The following morning, Richard called to inform me that Daniel had requested a private meeting at the lake house. An hour later, Daniel arrived. The expensive tailored suits were gone. He wore plain khakis, an open-collar shirt, and carried the tired expression of a man who hadn't slept in a week. He sat carefully on the porch chair. "I owe you a complete apology, Claire. I betrayed our marriage. I betrayed your friendship with Melissa. I disrespected your father's memory, and I treated you as though none of this belonged to you." Silence settled between us, not uncomfortable, just completely truthful. "I kept telling myself I built Harrison Capital," he whispered, looking down. "You helped build it, but I knew the truth even back then. I suppose I just let my ego blind me." "Do you think you'll ever forgive me, Claire?" he asked quietly. "Forgiveness isn't a light switch, Daniel. It's a journey. I believe you're sorry now, but I don't yet know whether you're sorry because you lost your company, or because you lost your family." The words seemed to strike him harder than anything else. Tears filled his eyes. For the first few days, I was mostly thinking about the company. That's the ugliest truth I've ever admitted. But yesterday, I looked at Ethan's stroller, and I realized I couldn't remember the last bedtime story I read to my son. I missed an entire year of his life while convincing myself I was working for him. He stood up to leave. "I'm not asking you to take me back, Claire. I don't deserve that. But I'd like the chance to become the father Ethan deserves." "I believe you," I said softly. "Enough to give you that chance." As he walked toward his car, he stopped near the steps. "Your father saw right through me long before I saw through myself." I smiled sadly. "Yes, he did. But he still believed that people could choose to become better. By the time autumn settled across Connecticut, 4 months had passed since Ethan's birthday. The maple trees surrounding the lake house had turned brilliant shades of red and gold. The divorce proceedings moved forward quietly and smoothly. Richard prepared every document with extraordinary care, and Daniel's attorney surprised everyone by fully cooperating instead of fighting. There were no ugly depositions, no screaming arguments over assets, and no television cameras waiting outside the courthouse. When reporters called, neither of us gave interviews. Silence can protect dignity when anger cannot. The formal financial settlement left Daniel comfortable, but nowhere near his former status. Some friends questioned my generosity, But I knew that if I spent the rest of my life measuring justice by how much Daniel suffered, I would never stop keeping score. And I was tired of counting. At the final shareholder meeting, Daniel officially tendered his resignation before the board. I confused authority with entitlement, he told the room filled with investors. I asked you to trust me after proving I couldn't be trusted in my own home. I don't deserve to continue leading this company. He signed the papers and sat down in quiet acceptance. A nationally respected executive was appointed as the new CEO, while I remained majority owner and governance chair. The corporate staff felt an overwhelming sense of relief. They could finally return to work without fear. Melissa moved away to Arizona to live with her sister, sending one final handwritten apology that I chose not to answer. Daniel, to everyone's shock, turned down several lucrative corporate job offers and accepted a position with a non-profit organization helping struggling family-owned businesses recover after economic hardships. He was earning less in a year than he used to make in a month, but his character was finally being forged. Every Saturday and Wednesday, Daniel showed up at the lake house precisely on time to spend hours with Ethan, no last-minute cancellations, no excuses, no business distractions. He restored an old red wagon for Ethan, pulling him around the yard while our son laughed endlessly. My neighbor Margaret once watched them from the porch and asked me, "Do you trust him again, Claire?" "Not the way I once did," I answered honestly. "Trust isn't rebuilt by grand speeches or expensive promises, Claire," Margaret smiled gently. "It's rebuilt simply by showing up, day after day." 2 years later, standing in my sunlit kitchen watching Ethan blow out 3 candles on his birthday cake surrounded by people who genuinely loved him, I realized the true difference in my life. It wasn't the money, the ownership, or the corporate victory, it was real, unshakable peace. Daniel sat at the table, handing Ethan a small, hand-carved wooden puzzle frame he had made himself. I looked at my son's bright smile and knew that real strength isn't measured by how completely you defeat someone who hurt you. Real strength is measured by how wisely you protect your heart, hold on to your dignity, and choose healing over hatred every single day. Ethan immediately sat on the floor and began putting the wooden puzzle pieces together. It wasn't perfect, but neither was the puzzle, and neither were any of us. Yet as I watched Daniel sit quietly beside him, I noticed something deeply important. He didn't look around to see who was watching his efforts. He wasn't performing for an audience or trying to fix his public image. For the first time in his adult life, he was simply being present as a father. After lunch, while Ethan played happily in the backyard with his cousins, Daniel and I sat quietly on the porch swing. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The nature of the silence between us had shifted dramatically over time. In the beginning, it had been heavy with unspoken anger, then weighted with grief, and later shrouded in uncertainty. Now, it had finally transformed into something steady, mutual respect. "I want to thank you, Claire," Daniel finally said, breaking the silence. I turned my head and looked at him. "For what, Daniel?" "For not destroying me when you had every legal and financial right to do so." I frowned slightly, shaking my head. "I didn't save you from consequences, Daniel. You faced every single one of them." "I know," he nodded slowly, gazing toward the quiet lake. "I lost my executive position. I lost the trust of the business community. And I lost you." I looked down at my hands in my lap. "Yes, you did." He took a slow, deep breath. "But despite all of that, you never tried to turn Ethan against me. You never tried to destroy my relationship with my son." I thought carefully about his words before speaking. "I wanted Ethan to have a father, Daniel. Even after everything that happened, in fact, especially after everything that happened." He looked toward the yard where Ethan was running and laughing freely. "I don't know if I'll ever truly forgive myself for what I did," he whispered softly. "Maybe you shouldn't entirely forget what happened," I answered gently. He looked at me in surprise. Why do you say that? Because remembering who you were at your absolute worst is what keeps you focused on becoming someone better. He nodded slowly, processing the thought. I spent so many years frantically chasing success. You weren't wrong to want success, Daniel. No, he looked down at the porch floorboards. But I was completely wrong to believe that success made me more important than the people around me. That was the very first time I had ever heard him express that realization without prompting or defense. It wasn't an excuse, nor was it a plea for sympathy, it was just plain, unvarnished truth. Later that year, I officially established the Harrison Family Foundation. Its purpose was simple yet profound, to help families understand a fundamental principle that my father had grasped better than anyone else, that money without wisdom can ruin generations. The foundation was designed to provide practical financial education for young entrepreneurs, support struggling family-owned businesses working to recover from unforeseen crises, and mentor future corporate leaders in ethical decision-making. At our inaugural event, I stepped onto a stage in front of hundreds of prominent guests and community leaders. Years earlier, the very thought of public speaking would have filled me with dread. I had spent my life intentionally staying out of the spotlight. But that evening felt completely different. I wasn't standing up there to boast about financial wealth or corporate power. I was standing there to share the crucial lessons that wealth had taught me. During my address, I offered a simple message to the audience: financial resources can open doors and create remarkable opportunities, but character alone determines what we choose to do once we walk through those doors. After the presentation concluded, an elderly gentleman approached me. He introduced himself as the owner of a modest manufacturing business, who had nearly lost everything following a severe family crisis years ago. He shook my hand with genuine warmth and said softly, "Your father would have been immensely proud of you tonight, Claire." I smiled, feeling a familiar warmth in my heart. "Thank you. What makes you say that?" He gestured toward the foundation's banner hanging behind us. "Because this entire effort isn't born out of revenge. It's born out of grace." His words stayed with me long after the event ended, because he was entirely right. When I first backed my car out of that driveway on the night of my son's birthday, I believed I was simply protecting myself and my child, and I was. But as time passed, I uncovered a far deeper truth. The greatest victory wasn't watching Daniel lose his empire. The greatest victory was reaching a point where I no longer needed him to lose anything for me to feel whole. Pain can easily trick us into believing that the only path to healing is to inflict equal suffering on the person who broke us. But true healing has never worked that way. Justice matters, boundaries are essential, and accountability is necessary. But peace of mind matters most of all. A year after our divorce was finalized, Daniel and I sat side by side inside an elementary school auditorium for Ethan's first school performance. Dozens of parents filled the folding chairs around us, some recording videos on their phones, some wiping tears from their eyes, and others trying patiently to keep younger siblings quiet. It was a scene of ordinary, beautiful family life. Ethan marched onto the stage wearing a bright yellow paper crown he had proudly crafted in class. The moment his eyes scanned the crowd and found the two of us sitting together, his face lit up with a brilliant smile. He didn't know the complex legal history, the high-stakes corporate drama, or the painful betrayal that had preceded that afternoon. He only knew that both of his parents were there to support him, and for a child, that is more than enough. On the quiet drive back to the lake house, my thoughts drifted back to the woman I had been on that fateful birthday night, the heartbroken mother carrying her sleeping baby away from a home she had once believed would last forever. I wished I could reach back through time and offer her a few words of comfort. I would tell her that losing a dream does not mean losing your future. I would tell her that personal dignity is infinitely more valuable than comfortable illusions. I would tell her that some painful endings are actually doors swinging open toward freedom. And I would remind her that the quiet, resolute decisions made in moments of profound heartbreak often become the foundation of our greatest strength. Today, Ethan is still growing up, oblivious to the storm that once surrounded his life. He knows nothing of the betrayal, the corporate power struggle, or the night my phone rang with 67 missed calls. One day, when he is old enough to understand the complexities of life, I may tell him our story, not to stir up old anger, and certainly not to force him to take sides, but to teach him a vital lesson about resilience. People will inevitably disappoint you, even those you love deeply. But what defines your life is not the pain you endure. Everyone experiences pain. What defines your life is what you choose to build with that pain. You can allow it to harden your heart into bitterness, or you can allow it to expand your wisdom and capacity for grace. I chose wisdom, and it is my deepest hope that my son will choose the same path when faced with his own trials. If this story reminds you of a moment in your own life when you had to choose quiet strength over destructive anger, take a moment to honor the distance you have traveled. Strength is rarely loud, and healing is a choice we make day after day. In the end, the greatest inheritance we leave to our children is never the balance in our bank accounts, or the titles on our doors. It is the living example of who we became when life gave us every reason to be bitter, and we chose to be wise instead.